So in this video, I am going to show you how I rebase my Grail Knights for the old world. But before I get into that, I really want to talk about if you should rebase or not. The way the new rules are set up to where your entire front rank attacks, whether they have base-to-base contact or not, means that playing a person with a smaller base size in a casual game might not be that big of a deal. The smaller based army would have some slight advantages here and there, but not enough it should matter in a casual game. You really just gotta worry about if you're playing tournaments or you're playing with like a real anal group about rules. Personally, I'm only rebasing because I don't like my old bases and I want to do something more green and more colorful, so this was just a good excuse for me. Keep in mind, people are also selling things like base extenders, which are just little 3D printed squares that fits over your previous base to make them the correct size. You might want to look into those as well. And if you plan to play older editions, you'll have an easier time with your smaller bases playing the old world than with your larger bases going back and playing 6th edition smaller bases. So again, it's all a matter of preference, but there is a cost associated with it and a time sink, so think long and hard before you decide to rebase or not. And if you still want to rebase, here's how I did it. So here I'm taking one of my Grail Knights, I believe is the old Bohemian model. Notice these slots on the bottom. That's going to make it a little hard. That means we can't just cut this flat and paste on a new base because it's going to have that added height to it. So I'm going to use these clippers here and I'm going to try to clip this base off. Assumably around the plastic parts that are on the model, the slotted of the Calvary, it'll be fairly weak. So if I make these cuts, these slants into it, it should peel off around the slotted base of the Calvary fairly easy. And I'm just being very careful here, very methodic. I don't want to actually accidentally nick this model. I have no idea if this one's coming back from the new world, and it is like one of my favorite models. So just being very careful here, and just clipping little bits at a time and peeling them off. So even though the slots on the horse were originally glued in with plastic glue and should have bonded with the base, there's still a weak point there, so it is easy to chip off the old base around those slotted lines, which means if you get a new base that are still having those slots, you should be able to salvage the horse well enough to just fit into the slots on your new base. I won't be doing that. I'm cutting the slots off because I'm using, well, currently bases that don't have the slots on them. So again, here I'm just slowly chipping off the other side now, taking off little bits at a time, leveraging the weak points, and then prying off all the black plastic base away from the horse. And if you're like me and bought this model used and never had a chance to paint the horse when it wasn't off his base, be sure to also use this time to go underneath your horse and get all the places where you weren't able to reach easily with the brush before. And with a little bit of patience, you end up with this. This could perfectly slot into a base style with the slots in, or if you're like me, now the next step, we're gonna chop these slots off. So I'm just very carefully taking my cutting tool, getting as close to the model as possible and snipping it off. Really nothing to it. If you've taken models off their sprue before, you can do this as well. I should note that it's pretty popular and common to cut off the molded grass bits of models like this. I think it looks better. I am not doing it for these rebase, just for the fact that it would mean even less contact points I have with the base. And since I no longer have these slots, and I'm just going to have these connection points and super glue to keep it on my base, I'm going to keep those intact if possible. Make sure the bottom of your model is flat. You might want to use a razor to straighten them out if they're not, and you should be relatively good to go to attach this to the next base. If you're like me and like to magnetize your bases, you can also salvage your old magnets with a little clay sculpting tool. So I'll use here, or really anything you can get underneath it and pry it open, not preferably because they'll kind of stick, and just chip away at it till you can shimmy the magnet off, just like that. So I'm just going to go through another example of one of these old Grail Knights. This one's glued in the same way as the other one, but this one obviously is a lot more glued in. It might not pry off as easy. You might have things like this as well. We still have the slot base to deal with. And so I'm still going to do the same method. I'm going to try to chip away the old base off of the horse. But this one's going to go a little bit slower, a little bit harder to do, but still very achievable. So I have sped the video up here quite a bit, but it's the exact same method. The old one, we're being very careful not to nick the horse, and we're just slowly chipping the old base away from the slots of the horse. And then I am removing the slots on the horse and cleaning up the bottoms a little bit, making them flat so they'll hold a lot of glue, prepared to glue them to the new base. So now I'm going to demonstrate how I rebased models on a scenic base. I got this tool. This is an X-Acto saw. You can get it from a hobby shop or Amazon. This is just a very thin blade that's going to slide beneath the scenic base and help you pry it off of the plastic beneath. So here we have the scenic base in question. This is a third-party miniature from Norba. It's a representation of a monarch, which is a very cool Grail Knight who never got an official model from GW. Notice this is the bottom flat. There's no slots here. So theoretically, we could trim off all the sides and just paste this on top of a new base. That might be a little bit easier, but I am going to actually take off the scenic base from the plastic. This model wasn't cast very well from the vendor, to be honest with you. It's not very flat on the bottom, so it's going to be really easy for me to work my saw on this and pry it up. You might have a harder time with a better printed model, but the same principles will apply. We are going to take our saw here, and it's very sharp, so be careful. Never push it towards your fingers, always away. You know, practice good knife safety. Away from the body, away from the fingers. Resist the urge to pull it. And so I'm just gonna put it here, and I'm gonna slowly work it back and forth and try to pry this off of the base below. And then I'm going to do it from the other side, and again, just very ease into it, trying to pry this model off the top. If you glued it with plastic glue, you're going to have to actually saw here. The same principle applies. And when we did this, we snapped the whole thing off, which wasn't ideal, but we got what we wanted. We got our base off of the plastic, and we're ready to redo it on the new, larger one. My model in the example is never flat to begin with. Yours might still be flat, or yours might have a little edges raised above after sawing it off. So next step here, once we glue the scenic base to its new base, is I'm going to take some of this plastic putty and go along the edges and seal them up flat. I'm going to clean up the putty around it with this scraping tool, let it dry, and then I'm going to go ahead and do up the base around the decorative scenic base to match the rest of mine. I'm not going to cover how I did that in this video, but definitely let the putty dry, then paint it, and then do your basing like normal. So that's my finished base, where before it should be a road, now it looks like it's just a little stone platform in the middle of gravel, and that looks pretty okay. I'm okay with that. Then we're just going to use some super glue to attach this knight back onto his base. Obviously I messed up a little bit here. This is out of frame, I apologize for that, but hopefully by the time you're watching these kind of videos, you know how to glue a model to its base, and then this one's done. We are doing the same thing with the rest of our models. Find out where you want it to be on your new base. This is my mountain metal base. You can see my other videos for how I did that. Put some super glue onto the contact points. Then we're going to set it onto the base. We're going to hold it onto it with a little bit of pressure to make sure it gets down into the actual metal of the base and doesn't just float onto our flock. And then we'll move on to the next one. And if you're like me and bought this model used and never had a chance to paint the horse, here we repeat the same process. Be sure to also use this kind to go where we want your horse and get all the places where you weren't able to attach some of this Loctite super glue, making sure the contact points are flat so they can hold well. We apply this very generously. We set it down on our flock. We hold it in place for a little bit. We set it aside and let it dry. And that's how I rebase my Grail Knights. So yeah, that's how I rebase my heavy cavalry for the old world. It's a lot easier than some people make it out to be. It's not that hard not to damage your model. Just be slow and careful, and just go for it. And if you found this video helpful at all, I hope you give it a like. Thanks for watching.